I've been a resident of Pine Township for 14 years and have farmed in Pine Township for most of my life. I've never spoken as a resident during public comment as it pertains to this. I've always been taught that the first step in learning involves the ears, not the mouth. Before you consider the ordinance that our planning commission has drafted, I have a few things that I'd like to say that will hopefully provide some context as it pertains to my thoughts on how this wind project could affect our township and how that is reflected in the spirit of our ordinance. As you've seen and heard, the ordinance we drafted is a conservative one. There are parts of it that some may consider restrictive, and I don't disagree that there could be room for discussion on something. But for me, the why is most important. Why draft a protective ordinance? Why err on the side of caution? We deal with risk every day. Why should this be any different? There are the obvious reasons that have been discussed at length during most of these meetings and are reflected in the results of our survey. Everything from health and safety concerns to liability and aesthetics and the preservation of our natural resources. These are all extremely valid concerns, but it's undeniable that they are somewhat subjective depending on what each individual feels they have to gain from the risks being taken. So I have to fall back on what I know. And what I have concluded throughout this 2+ year process is that I do not trust them. And by them, I mean Apex. I don't trust what they say. I don't trust what they do. And I certainly do not trust what they say they're going to do. Who would have ever thought that in such a short amount of time, an entity could come to our county and create such a divide? They are professionals, and they know what works. They're not here for the enrichment of our community. They're here because they're paid to be here. And after that paycheck comes, they'll be gone as fast as they came. And I respect that everyone has a right to make a living. I really do. But just because they're selling something does not mean that we're obligated to buy it. There are many examples of why I have no trust in these people, but here are a few of them that I'd like to present to you. In January of 2020, I was contacted by a colleague that was part of a group of farmers that had been to a few meetings with an Apex sales representative. They were going over the lease that Apex was offering, and he asked if I'd be interested in joining and hearing what they had to say. I told him I would, so I could at least give him my opinion on the lease. I contacted the salesman to make sure it was okay if I joined the meeting, and his response was no, I'd rather you not be there. The discussion we'll be having is proprietary to the group. So how could it be that the landowners that this salesman was pitching to wanted me there, but the salesman didn't? Well, prior to this, the same sales representative had contacted another member of my family, asking if we'd be interested in looking at signing a lease on our acreage. Our response was, no thank you. So the reason they didn't want me there was because they felt they had a chance of getting this group of landowners signed up, and they didn't want me there with a differing opinion, asking questions they didn't want to have to answer. How does that build trust? The second instance has been an ongoing ordeal. Starting a little over a year ago, we began to hear from neighbors and colleagues that there was an Apex salesman going around telling people that Maine Farms was all but signed up for wind. We were so against solar that we decided we better sign up for wind instead to keep solar out. We heard this from multiple reputable people, so we did some investigating. We discovered that it was a land agent that was responsible for our area. We didn't know this man from Adam. Never seen him, never heard of him, and certainly never met with him. And yet, he has the gumption and lack of moral fiber to go around pulling our name and reputation that we took generations to build through the mud.
Yeah.
We contacted the representative along with the project manager, telling them to stop using our name immediately. We even sent a cease and desist letter to them, which they came back with a statement. Apex has inquired about these conversations with representatives currently meeting with local landowners. Based on these inquiries, I understand that the representatives have not made inaccurate statements about landowners signing land agreements to participate in the project. Specifically, the representatives have not stated that farming parties have signed or intend to sign agreements to participate. So all the neighboring landowners that we've known for years must have made this all up. Since that letter was sent, we've had at least 2 more instances where that same representative has sold the same story, and one of them was an employee of ours this winter. The third experience I had with them involved my work on the planning commission. But just before our public hearing, the project manager sent out an email discussing his disappointment with our drafted ordinance. This email came to my email address that was not publicly listed with the township. Instead, it was to my email that I use for business. I figured no big deal, he must have just found it somewhere. But then I started getting emails from concerned citizens also expressing their disappointment with the ordinance. They also came to my business email that is not public. And most of these emails were verbatim from one to the next. So these concerned citizens all came up with the exact same words, and they were all sent to an email address that was not listed with the township. How do you suppose they got this information? It was a coordinated effort put together by Apex, a corporation that we had never even heard of 3 years ago. Now, I want to be perfectly clear. My distrust does not extend to the members of this community that have signed a lease with Apex. I have friends and I have colleagues that have signed leases that I absolutely think no less of now than before all of this. I in no way want to infringe on their property rights by telling them they can't sign a lease on their property. My distrust lies with Apex as a whole, and specifically with the individuals that are part of this project. I am not categorically against wind energy. It has its place. Is it for Pine Township? Maybe. But right now, we have a specific wind developer with a specific project in mind, and the details to that project are vague and only come to us in snippets. I believe it is in our township's best interest to approach this with great caution. If some turbines come to the area and we find as a community that we can live with them, we can always amend our ordinance to where it would be easier to site more turbines. But based on the project manager's response to our current drafted ordinance, he wants us to give him the keys and do with our township as he sees fit. I just can't see where that's going to be in the best interest of our township, because I just don't trust them. If some think this disqualifies me based on bias, I will unapologetically admit that my bias will always be for the preservation of this community and the fulfillment of our township's community vision that states Pine Township will be a community that is firmly committed to the preservation of its agricultural lands and natural features. We will strive to protect those qualities that define our community by managing new growth in a manner that is consistent with our community character, environmentally sensitive, and economically sound. Now, I may not trust Apex, but I trust this board, and I trust the resiliency of this township. No matter how this goes, no matter how it turns out, we are going to carry on as a community. Thank you.
Yeah.